The manufactured joy of the Willow Creek Gardens, HOA's annual Summerfest, hummed with an almost desperate cheerfulness. Children's laughter, carefully orchestrated not to be too loud, mingled with the anemic sizzle of meticulously planned barbecue stations. An overly enthusiastic local band churned out upbeat generic tunes. At one edge of the sprawling, unnaturally green park, a banner proclaimed, "Willow Creek Gardens, a neurodiversity-friendly community." It drooped slightly on one side, a forgotten casualty of the morning's setup. Dr. Lena Hayes, the newly appointed National Director of the fledgling Office of Neurodiversity Affairs, observed the curated suburban idyll with a practiced analytical gaze that couldn't quite extinguish a flicker of hope. She was here as a personal guest of the Vance family, David, a gentle-mannered software engineer, Sarah, a fierce but weary advocate, and their 10-year-old son, Elijah, universally known as Eli. Eli, whose autism spectrum disorder shaped his unique perception of the world, was currently mesmerized by the intricate dance of sunlight filtering through the leaves of a majestic oak. His small hands fluttered near his face, a delicate rhythmic stim, a visual echo of his internal contentment, a language Lena understood intimately. Lena's federal office, born from decades of advocacy and a desperate need for systemic change, was mandated to champion understanding, acceptance, and concrete support for neurodivergent individuals across every facet of American society. Community-level inclusion was a cornerstone of their mission. The Vances, invaluable members of Lena's National Advisory Council, had spoken with cautious optimism about Willow Creek Gardens' recent highly publicized overtures towards becoming neurodiversity-friendly. This Summerfest, Lena knew, was intended as a showcase, a meticulously staged performance. The performance shattered with the visceral suddenness of a dropped stage light. A pack of older teenagers, consumed by a raucous game of tag that bordered on aggressive, careened into a table laden with brightly colored helium balloons. Several escaped bobbing towards the sky like untethered hopes. One, a large, shimmering crimson balloon, drifted directly over Eli and popped with a percussive bang that felt like a physical assault. For Eli, whose sensory world was a symphony of heightened perceptions, the unexpected sonic explosion and the sudden visual chaos were an overwhelming deluge. He cried out a sharp, piercing vocalization of pure distress, hands slamming over his ears. His body began to tremble violently. He dropped to the grass, instinctively curling into a tight, protective ball, his small frame racked with the tremors of an impending sensory meltdown, a neurological storm consuming him from within. The sunlight through the leaves, moments before a beautiful ballet, now fractured into painful, jagged shards. Sarah and David were by his side, in a heartbeat, their movements honed by love and experience, their voices a low, soothing counter-melody to the rising cacophony. "It's okay, sweetie," Sarah murmured, her body a shield against the sudden ring of curious, anxious faces. "Just a loud noise. We're right here. Breathe with me." But before their well-rehearsed de-escalation strategies could take root, before Eli could even begin to find an anchor in their presence, Officer Mark Bishop of Sterling Security Solutions descended. Bishop was a man carved from granite, and resentment, his beefy physique and perpetually scowling face radiating an aura of aggressive intolerance. His history with Eli was a litany of microaggressions and overt harassment. He'd been patrolling the festival's perimeter earlier, his gaze lingering on Eli with unconcealed suspicion, muttering just loud enough for David to hear about, keeping an eye on potential troublemakers. "What's all this commotion?" Bishop barked, his voice a bullhorn in the already fractured soundscape, his eyes fixing on Eli's distressed form with a look of undisguised contempt. "This boy is causing a public disturbance. Again, I've warned you people about these outbursts." His hand almost reflexively drifted towards the heavy-duty restraints on his utility belt. "Officer Bishop, please." David Vance interjected, his voice tight, but remarkably controlled a dam, holding back a flood of fury. "Our son is autistic. He's having a sensory meltdown. He's not a threat. He just needs a quiet space, some understanding to regulate." Bishop sneered, a cruel twist of his lips. "Meltdown. Or a damn tantrum for attention. Some kids just need to learn discipline, respect for public order. He's making people uncomfortable." He took a menacing step closer. There was a flicker almost imperceptible in his eyes, a shadow of something that might have been uncertainty, perhaps a ghost of a memory of his own child quickly suppressed. His training, or perhaps something deeper, a learned response to fear and a need for dominance kicked in. Control the situation, eliminate the disruption. He saw Eli not as a child in crisis, but as a malfunctioning component in the otherwise orderly machine of the Summerfest. Ignoring Sarah's desperate rising pleas and David's furious escalating protests, Bishop lunged. He grabbed Eli, who was now wailing a raw sound of pure terror, by the arm, yanking him roughly unceremoniously to his feet. Eli, overwhelmed by the aggressive physical contact, the booming voice, the looming threatening presence, instinctively tried to pull away, his cries escalating into incoherent shrieks of abject fear. The world wasn't just loud anymore. It was attacking him. "See resisting." Bishop yelled a grotesque triumph in his voice, as if Eli's terrified, reflexive self-preservation validated his brutality. He wrestled the small, struggling boy, whose limbs flailed with the desperation of a drowning swimmer, to the ground. With a grunt of exertion, Bishop forced Eli onto his stomach, planting a heavy, unyielding knee squarely in the center of his small, fragile back, pinning him to the unforgiving grass. Eli's small body went rigid, then began to thrash beneath the crushing weight, his cries choked into ragged, gasping sobs, his breathing shallow and panicked. It felt to Eli like the sky itself was falling a monstrous weight, pressing the air from his lungs, the light from his eyes. Lena Hayes, who had been moving towards the unfolding horror with a sickening premonition, felt a surge of glacial rage. This wasn't just incompetence or ignorance. This was a savage, calculated assault on a helpless neurodivergent child in the throes of a profound medical and psychological crisis. This was a brutal, contemptuous violation of every principle of de-escalation, every tenet of disability rights, every fundamental shred of human decency. This was the ugly reality beneath the neurodiversity-friendly veneer. "Officer Bishop," Lena's voice, though not raised, sliced through the surrounding chaos with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, imbued with an undeniable weight of federal authority. "Release that child, immediately. You are employing excessive, dangerous, and wholly inappropriate force on a minor with a known disability who is experiencing an acute sensory meltdown. Your actions constitute a federal offense." Startled, Bishop twisted his head, his face flushed with exertion and a petty, triumphant power. He saw Lena, a poised, well-dressed black woman, radiating an air of quiet, unshakable command, and his expression hardened into one of dismissive arrogance. "And who the hell are you, lady? Stay out of this. This is official HOA security business. This little delinquent is a public menace, and I'm handling it according to protocol." He pressed his knee harder into Eli's back, a cruel assertion of his perceived authority. Eli let out a muffled, agonized sound. Lena took another deliberate step closer, her eyes, like chips of obsidian, cold and unyielding. She reached into her blazer, smoothly producing a leather credential case. She flipped it open, revealing the gleaming gold eagle and the stark official identification of the United States Department of Health and Human Services. "I am Dr. Lena Hayes," she stated, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone that made Bishop involuntarily flinch, a primal instinct recognizing a superior predator. "I am the National Director of the Office of Neurodiversity Affairs, and you, Officer Bishop, have just assaulted a federally protected individual directly in front of me, a federal officer. You are not handling anything according to any legitimate lawful protocol. You are committing a crime, and your official HOA security business, as you call it, is about to become a matter of urgent national federal concern." The self-satisfied smirk on Bishop's face didn't just vanish. It was wiped away, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. Then a wave of what looked like pure, unadulterated panic. The Director of Neurodiversity Affairs, here, watching. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and damning. He had just catastrophically, monumentally, irrevocably screwed up. As local police, alerted by a flurry of frantic 911 calls from horrified onlookers, began to arrive, sirens wailing a counterpoint to Eli's distressed cries, Bishop was hastily cuffed. In the scuffle and his panicked state, a folded, official-looking document slipped from a pocket in his tactical vest, fluttering unnoticed to the grass near Lena's feet. Dr. Lena Hayes was a pioneering force, a nationally acclaimed expert in autism research, disability law, and the intricate architecture of inclusive policy. Her appointment as the first national director of the newly established Office of Neurodiversity Affairs had been lauded as a watershed moment by advocacy groups. This high-level federal agency was her vision tasked with fostering understanding, acceptance, and systemic support for neurodivergent individuals across all sectors of American life. She was a woman of profound intellect, unwavering compassion, and an unshakable conviction that every individual, irrespective of their neurological wiring, deserved to live with dignity, safety, and full inclusion. Her presence at the Willow Creek Gardens Summerfest was part of her office's grassroots engagement strategy, to understand local challenges firsthand, to identify best practices, and to gently nudge communities towards genuine neurodiversity-affirming environments. Willow Creek, with its recent glossy pronouncements about embracing inclusivity, had been a cautiously optimistic test case. Officer Bishop had just detonated that optimism. Elijah Eli Vance was by any measure a remarkable child. His autism presented him with a unique set of challenges, particularly in navigating the often overwhelming sensory bombardment of the neurotypical world and in articulating his complex needs and emotions, especially under duress. He was primarily nonverbal, his voice a sophisticated augmentative and alternative communication AAC device, a tablet with custom-designed software that spoke for him when he typed or selected icons. His father, David, had poured his software engineering expertise into perfecting its interface. Eli also possessed a profound, almost spiritual connection to music, an uncanny ability to perceive patterns and connections invisible to most, and a gentle, affectionate nature that shone brightly to those who took the time to truly see him. His parents, David and Sarah, a tireless, articulate advocate for disability education, were his fiercest protectors, his most dedicated champions. They had worked ceaselessly to cultivate a supportive, understanding ecosystem for Eli. Their move to Willow Creek Gardens had been a calculated risk, predicated heavily on the HOA's advertised commitment to family values, community well-being, and ironically, its nascent neurodiversity-friendly initiative. Officer Mark Bishop was the brutal, glaring antithesis of that commitment. A former military police officer, his discharge papers had sterling security, bothered to scrutinize them, hinted at a pattern of excessive force and an inability to de-escalate volatile situations, a detail conveniently overlooked in their cost-cutting hiring process. Bishop possessed an unyielding authoritarian mindset, a profound deficit of empathy, and a dangerous weaponized ignorance regarding neurodiversity. He didn't see Eli's stemming his occasional vocalizations, his deep need for routine and predictability, as manifestations of a neurological difference. He saw them as willful defiance, bad parenting, or in his cruder moments, freakishness. He seemed to derive a perverse, grim satisfaction from correcting Eli, from attempting to forcibly mold him to neurotypical expectations, often through intimidation and a flagrant misuse of his security guard authority. He genuinely believed, perhaps fueled by his own past traumas and a rigid, fear-based worldview, that he was imposing necessary order on chaos. Mrs. Karen Sterling, the imperious, image-obsessed president of the Willow Creek Gardens HOA, was Bishop's primary and most powerful enabler. A woman whose compass perpetually pointed towards property values and the superficial veneer of order and tranquility in her meticulously managed domain, Sterling viewed Bishop's firm hand not as a liability, but as a valuable asset in maintaining what she termed community standards. She had consistently, arrogantly dismissed the Vances' repeated, increasingly desperate complaints about Bishop's escalating harassment of Eli. Her responses were often laced with thinly veiled ableist insinuations. Eli needed more discipline, the Vances needed to better control their child, or perhaps this community isn't the right fit for everyone. She truly believed she was acting in the best interests of the majority, blinded by her own prejudices and the echoing concerns of a vocal, privileged segment of residents. The inciting incident that had first flagged Bishop's specific targeted animosity towards Eli on Lena Hayes' radar, relayed through a national neurodiversity advocacy network that liaised with her office, had occurred several months prior. Eli, accompanied by David, had been peacefully using his AAC device to talk to the ducks at the community pond, a simple, joyful ritual for him. Officer Bishop had materialized his demeanor instantly aggressive, demanding Eli stop making those weird electronic noises. Because it was disturbing other residents, the pond was deserted. He had then shockingly attempted to confiscate Eli's AAC device, his voice claiming it was an unauthorized electronic recording device in a common area. David's refusal had led to a heated argument, which Bishop subsequently documented in a deliberately biased incident report, painting David as belligerent and non-compliant, and Eli as disruptive. The HOA board, under Mrs. Sterling's unwavering leadership, took no action against Bishop. Instead, they issued the Vances a courtesy reminder about maintaining appropriate noise levels in community spaces. The rising tide of Bishop's harassment, buoyed by Mrs. Sterling's complicity, had continued relentless and cruel. Bishop began a systematic campaign to exclude Eli from community amenities. The playground would suddenly be closed for urgent maintenance whenever Eli and Sarah approached. Eli's AAC device, Bishop arbitrarily declared, was no longer permitted at the community pool, its electronic sounds violating newly established pool serenity rules. He even tried to bar Eli from specific park benches, claiming they were reserved for quiet contemplation by adult residents only. Each incident was a petty, calculated assertion of power, designed to isolate, to wear down, to make Eli and his family feel unwelcome, to push them out. A second, more alarming escalation occurred when Mrs. Sterling, actively encouraged by Bishop, railroaded a new HOA bylaw through a sparsely attended meeting. The bylaw, titled Minimum Behavioral Standards for Children in Common Areas, was vaguely worded but transparently targeted. Autistic behaviors, stimming, vocalizations, and meltdowns were implicitly characterized as disruptive, unsightly, and potentially frightening to other residents. It granted Sterling security guards sweeping authority to remove any child deemed in violation. At the HOA meeting, Sarah Vance had spoken with fiery eloquence, her voice trembling with passion about the need for understanding, for acceptance, for Eli's fundamental rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Mrs. Sterling had listened with a condescending, plastered-on smile, then coolly stated, "While we sympathize deeply with families facing unique challenges, the primary fiduciary responsibility of this HOA is to protect the peace, tranquility, and frankly, the property values of all residents. And some behaviors, however unfortunate, are simply not compatible with a harmonious community environment." The bylaw passed. It was a green light, a mandate for Bishop to escalate his campaign now with the full codified and weaponized backing of the HOA. The midpoint twist, the revelation that transformed this localized tragedy into a potential national scandal, began to crystallize for Lena Hayes even before the Summerfest. Her office was already conducting an ongoing review of training standards for private security firms. Nationwide, a review prompted by a disturbing uptick in complaints regarding aggressive interactions with disabled individuals. Her investigators had been digging into Sterling Security Solutions, a rapidly expanding national corporation with a reputation for low bids and aggressive tactics. They were uncovering a consistent, deeply alarming pattern. Sterling Security systematically cut costs by providing only the most cursory, woefully inadequate training to its guards, especially in crucial areas like de-escalation, disability, awareness, crisis, intervention, and civil rights. They frequently hired individuals with problematic employment histories like Bishop because they were cheaper, more pliable, and more willing to engage in the aggressive zero-tolerance tactics that certain HOAs like Willow Creek Gardens under Mrs. Sterling actively sought and rewarded. Furthermore, Sterling Security boasted a formidable in-house legal team, adept at aggressively quashing complaints, settling potentially damaging lawsuits quietly and with restrictive non-disclosure agreements, and fiercely protecting their lucrative contracts. This wasn't just about one rogue guard or one prejudiced HOA president. This was a systemic for-profit malignancy, an industry preying on communities' fears and often trampling the rights of their most vulnerable residents in the pursuit of profit. The document Lena had inconspicuously retrieved from the grass near where Bishop was apprehended felt strangely heavy in her pocket. Later, in the sterile quiet of a temporary office set up at the local police station, she unfolded it. It wasn't a duty roster or a standard HOA memo. It was a list of priority communities under a heading Project Serene Horizon, Phase 2. Willow Creek Gardens was on it. Alongside were notes, Subject EV, Persistent Non-Compliance Parental Intransigence. Recommend escalation of discouragement protocols. Chillingly at the bottom was a stamped approval from Sterling Corporate Oversight and a handwritten annotation, per HL Consortium Directive, maintain premium demographic alignment. HL Consortium. A quick encrypted search by her team cross-referenced the initials with known shell corporations. It pointed towards a shadowy cabal of high-end property developers and investment groups known for aggressively curating the demographic makeup of upscale communities to maximize property values and appeal to a specific wealthy clientele. They weren't just enabling discrimination, they were funding it, orchestrating it through compliant security firms like Sterling. This was far bigger, far more sinister than she had imagined. Eli wasn't just a target of a prejudiced guard, he was a data point in a ruthless corporate strategy. A red herring had briefly muddied the waters weeks earlier when several incidents of minor vandalism, graffiti on the community clubhouse uprooted prize-winning roses from Mrs. Sterling's own garden, had plagued Willow Creek. Mrs. Sterling and Officer Bishop had immediately loudly blamed unsupervised delinquent youths, using it as further justification for their increasingly aggressive patrolling and their zero-tolerance approach. They had even subtly, insidiously implied that children like Eli, with their unpredictable behaviors and lack of normal social boundaries, might be connected. This had, for a short time, deflected some community scrutiny from Bishop's specific relentless targeting of Eli, making it seem part of a larger, albeit misguided, crackdown on disorder. But Lena, armed with her growing knowledge of Sterling Security's patterns, and now the damning Project Serene Horizon document, saw it for what it likely was, a deliberate smokescreen, or perhaps even acts orchestrated to justify further security contracts and more aggressive measures. Now, as Lena Hayes stood on the trampled grass of the Willow Creek Gardens green, the festive banners mocking the scene of brutality, watching Officer Bishop, stripped of his bluster, being placed into a police car she knew. This moment was not merely a tragic culmination of localized harassment and HOA negligence. It was a symptom, a raw, bleeding wound, exposing a much larger national crisis of systemic discrimination and corporate malfeasance. The fight for Eli Vance's safety, dignity, and justice was about to become a crucible, a fight for the rights and safety of neurodivergent individuals everywhere against forces far more powerful and insidious than a single ignorant guard. The scene on the park green replayed in Lena's mind, the raw, visceral horror, frozen in a tableau of ignorant brutality, parental anguish, and the dawning shock of a community confronted with the ugliness beneath its manicured surface. Officer Bishop, his face now pale and slack, finally processed the full weight of the gold federal shield Dr. Lena Hayes had presented. The words, National Director Office of Neurodiversity Affairs, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, echoed in the stunned silence that had enveloped the Summerfest crowd, a silence broken only by Eli's ragged, painful sobs. Get off that child. Now, Officer Bishop. Lena had enunciated each word a steel pellet. You are inflicting severe physical and psychological trauma on a minor with a known neurological disability, experiencing an acute sensory meltdown. Your actions are not only a catastrophic failure of any sane emergency or security protocol, they constitute felony assault, a blatant violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 242, and a host of other state and federal statutes. I will take great pleasure in enumerating for your legal counsel in a federal courtroom. Bishop scrambling to his feet as the first local officers arrived, bluster replaced by a desperate stammering. Fear had tried, I didn't know. He was out of control. I thought he was dangerous. A threat. He looked genuinely bewildered, as if the concept of his actions having severe consequences was entirely new to him. Perhaps his PTSD, a detail his file would later confirm from his less-than-stellar military discharge, had indeed caused him to perceive Eli's meltdown as a direct threat, a chaotic situation he was trained to neutralize with force. But his fear did not excuse his brutality. He was frightened, Officer. Lena had cut him off, her voice like chipped ice. Frightened by a sudden loud noise, by the surrounding chaos, and then primarily by your ignorant, aggressive, and wholly unwarranted assault. He is autistic. He was experiencing a sensory meltdown, not a tantrum. He was not resisting. He was reacting to overwhelming pain and terror. And you, in your profound incompetence and ingrained prejudice, chose to escalate to brutalize rather than to de-escalate and protect, which is your actual, if clearly uncomprehended, duty. Sarah and David Vance had finally reached Eli, who lay limp, his small body, trembling his sobs, a continuous, heartbreaking tremor. Sarah gathered him into her arms, rocking him gently, murmuring reassurances he was likely too traumatized to process. David, his face a mask of cold, contained fury that was almost more terrifying than open rage, turned to Bishop. You animal. You could have killed him. You could have broken his back. Indeed, he could have. Lena affirmed, her gaze unwavering, fixed on Bishop. She then turned to the younger, visibly shaken guard, Peterson, who had stood by frozen and useless during the assault. Officer Peterson, you witnessed this entire event. You will be required to give a full and detailed statement to federal investigators. Your cooperation or lack thereof will be duly noted and will significantly impact your future. Peterson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and nodded mutely, eyes wide with fear. Mrs. Karen Sterling. The HOA president finally pushed her way through the ring of horrified, murmuring onlookers, her face a mask of indignant outrage, a desperate attempt to reassert control. What is the meaning of this disturbance, Dr. Hayes? I am Karen Sterling, president of the Willow Creek Gardens. Homeowners Association Officer Bishop was merely attempting to maintain order to ensure the safety and enjoyment of all our residents. This boy, she gestured contemptuously towards Eli, still shuddering in his mother's arms, has been a consistent source of disruption in this community. His parents are clearly incapable or unwilling to control him. We have rules here. We have bylaws. We expect certain standards of behavior. Her voice, usually so imperiously steady, had a slight, almost imperceptible tremble. She was trying to convince herself as much as Lena. Lena turned the full force of her icy, concentrated composure on Mrs. Sterling. Madam President, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, each word precise. Your standards of behavior apparently include the brutal physical assault of a disabled child by your untrained, unqualified, and clearly prejudiced security personnel. Your rules and bylaws do not and never will supersede federal law. Your HOA, and you personally as its president, and indeed Sterling Security Solutions as your contractor, are now under active federal investigation for conspiracy to violate civil rights, for fostering and maintaining a hostile environment for residents with disabilities, for gross negligence in the hiring, training, and oversight of your security forces, and potentially, given what I'm beginning to uncover, for participation in a far broader scheme of discriminatory practices. I strongly suggest you contact your attorney. You and Mr. Bishop and the CEO of Sterling Security will be hearing from mine and from the U.S. Attorney General's office very, very shortly. Karen Sterling's carefully coiffed composure finally irrevocably shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving it a sickly, mottled gray. Federal investigation, U.S. Attorney General, conspiracy. The words hung in the humid summer air like a death knell for her meticulously curated world of suburban tyranny and illusionary control. The crowd, previously a mix of shocked silence and horrified whispers, now seemed to lean in their faces, a mixture of condemnation for Sterling and a dawning understanding of the gravity of what they'd witnessed. Some residents, however, exchanged uneasy glances. A few even muttered about overreach and HOA autonomy, revealing the fissures that would soon crack the community wide open. Local police, led by a competent-looking supervising sergeant named Miller, quickly deferred to Lena's federal authority once she outlined the jurisdiction and the clear civil rights violations. Officer Bishop was formally arrested, read his Miranda rights, and placed in the back of a patrol car, his face a mask of sullen disbelief and dawning terror. Eli Vance, still barely responsive, was rushed by ambulance to Haven County Pediatric Hospital, David and Sarah, white-faced and trembling beside him. The initial medical assessment was grim, severe bruising across his back and chest, a suspected concussion from his head striking the ground when Bishop tackled him, and acute, profound psychological trauma. The sensory overload from the balloon pop, catastrophically compounded by Bishop's violent assault, had plunged him into a state of near catatonic shock. The federal investigation launched by Dr. Lena Hayes was swift, unsparing, and multi-pronged. Her team from the Office of Neurodiversity Affairs, working in close conjunction with the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, and the FBI descended upon Willow Creek Gardens and the corporate offices of Sterling Security Solutions. The bystander videos of Bishop's assault on Eli, already igniting a firestorm on social media under the hashtag #JusticeForEli, provided irrefutable, horrifying evidence of the initial crime. The Project Serene Horizon document proved to be the Rosetta Stone. It unlocked a labyrinth of shell corporations, coded communications, and clandestine meetings. Sterling Security Solutions, as Lena had suspected, was not just negligent. It was a key operational arm of the HL Consortium. Their business model relied on providing HOAs with plausible deniability while enforcing the consortium's demographic purity directives. Their training manuals obtained via subpoena contained outdated, offensive, and blatantly illegal protocols for dealing with undesirable elements or non-conforming individuals, with no substantive mention of AD requirements or neurodiversity beyond token easily bypassed modules. They specifically recruited individuals like Bishop, ex-military or former law enforcement, with checkered records often struggling with their own unaddressed traumas, valuing their perceived toughness and willingness to follow orders without question over actual competence, compassion, or understanding of civil rights. The Willow Creek Gardens HOA records also subpoenaed were a damning indictment of Mrs. Sterling's complicity. Her emails and internal board communications were rife with derogatory ableist references to Eli and other neurodivergent children in the community, whom she variously termed nuisances, liabilities, and detriments to community harmony and property values. She had actively encouraged and lauded Bishop's aggressive tactics, praising his firm hand in maintaining our standards. Financial records painstakingly pieced together by forensic accountants uncovered a complex web of kickbacks and consulting fees flowing from Sterling Security and ultimately traceable back to the HL Consortium, to Sterling and several key HOA board members, ensuring the renewal of their lucrative multi-year security contract and their continued compliance. The arrests came in waves. Officer Mark Bishop was indicted on multiple federal charges: felony assault, deprivation of rights under color of law, resulting in bodily injury, and conspiracy. Hate crime enhancements were sought due to the clear evidence of his ableist targeting of Eli. Mrs. Karen Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Security Solutions, and several high-ranking executives within the HL Consortium, along with complicit HOA board members, faced a battery of charges, including conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, wire fraud, mail fraud, and violations of the Fair Housing Act. The case of Eli Vance became a national lightning rod. Neurodiversity advocacy groups, disability rights organizations, civil rights leaders, and horrified parents across the country condemned the assault and the systemic corruption it exposed, demanding sweeping radical change. The hashtag #JusticeForEli evolved into the Sejaljas Eli Vance Act and Yas End Ho Irani. The national media descended on Willow Creek Gardens, its carefully manicured lawns and faux colonial architecture, now an incongruous backdrop for a story of brutal prejudice, corporate greed, and courageous resistance. The community itself fractured. Some residents rallied fiercely around the Vances, organizing fundraisers and local awareness campaigns, their eyes open to the bigotry that had festered in their midst. Others, however, retreated into defensive denial, complaining about the negative publicity and falling property values. Some even daring to suggest the Vances had brought this on themselves by not better managing Eli. Eli's recovery was a slow, arduous, heartbreaking pilgrimage. He spent weeks in the hospital, then months in intensive specialized therapy, physical occupational speech to help him regain trust and confidence with his AAC device, which he initially refused to touch, associating it with Bishop's attempt to confiscate it, and the terror of the assault, and most crucially, trauma therapy. The vibrant, spontaneous joy that had once characterized him, his fascination with the symphony of colors in light, was muted, overshadowed by a deep-seated anxiety, a pervasive fear of loud noises, sudden movements, crowds, and especially men in uniforms. The world, once a source of wonder, now felt laden with potential threats. But surrounded by the unwavering, fierce love of his parents, the skilled patient support of his therapists, and the unexpected outpouring of support from a now awakened and horrified nation, Eli began, ever so slowly, painstakingly, to heal. One afternoon, weeks into his therapy, he hesitantly reached for his AAC. His fingers trembled as he slowly typed, then retyped a message. His synthesized voice, quiet but clear, filled the room. Light, still, pretty. Fear, big, but Eli, bigger. Sarah wept. Dr. Lena Hayes, thrust into an even brighter national spotlight, used the platform not for self-aggrandizement, but as a powerful fulcrum for transformative change. She testified before congressional committees, her calm, articulate, and impassioned advocacy making an unassailable case for sweeping federal reforms. Eli's Law. The National Neurodiversity Safety, Inclusion, and Accountability Act was drafted, a comprehensive landmark piece of legislation that she had personally championed, working tirelessly with a bipartisan group of lawmakers who had been moved by Eli's story and the sheer scale of the uncovered corruption. It mandated national standardized evidence-based training and certification requirements for all law enforcement and private security personnel on recognizing and appropriately responding to neurodivergent individuals. This training was to be co-designed and delivered by neurodivergent individuals and their families, focusing on de-escalation communication strategies, sensory sensitivities, and avoiding harmful restraints or escalation. The creation of a national publicly accessible database to track complaints, disciplinary actions, and certifications for private security officers and firms, preventing individuals like Bishop from simply moving from one employer or state to another. Significantly increased federal funding for community-based neurodiversity awareness and acceptance programs, crisis intervention teams, independent of law enforcement, and readily accessible resources for families to navigate diagnoses, support needs, and advocacy. Strengthened federal, civil, and criminal penalties for discrimination, harassment, or assault targeting neurodivergent individuals, including specific provisions addressing abuses under color of authority by private security. Clear, unambiguous guidelines for HOAs and other community organizations on their responsibilities under the ADA and Fair Housing Act to ensure full inclusion, reasonable accommodations, and accessibility for all residents with robust federal oversight, steep financial penalties for non-compliance, and pathways for direct federal intervention in cases of systemic discrimination. The law also included provisions to dismantle monopolistic and predatory practices by entities like the HL Consortium. The passage of Eli's Law was a hard-fought battle. Lobbyists for private security firms and real estate developers poured millions into opposing it. Some politicians beholden to these interests or resistant to federal oversight tried to water it down or kill it in committee. But the public outcry, fueled by Eli's story and Lena's relentless articulate advocacy, was overwhelming. The tide had turned. The trials of Officer Bishop Mrs. Sterling and the Sterling Security through HL Consortium executives were landmark events broadcast live and followed avidly by millions. Bishop, confronted with the irrefutable video evidence, his own damning statements, the Project Serene Horizon document, and the powerful testimony of Dr. Hayes and the Vance family, showed a flicker of what might have been remorse during his sentencing. He spoke briefly of his military service, his PTSD, his feeling of being set up to fail by Sterling Security's inadequate training and toxic culture, but ultimately acknowledged his actions were wrong, terribly wrong. He was convicted on all major counts and sentenced to a lengthy term in federal prison. Mrs. Sterling, her reputation in tatters, her carefully constructed world of privilege and prejudice dismantled, was also convicted for her pivotal role in the conspiracy and received a significant sentence, her ill-gotten assets seized. The Sterling Security CEO and several HL Consortium figures faced similar fates, their corporate empire crumbling under the weight of federal indictments and public outrage. Sterling Security Solutions was dissolved, its assets liquidated with a substantial portion directed to a newly established National Center for Neurodiversity Justice and Family Support funded as part of Eli's Law. Eli Vance never fully regained the carefree innocence that Officer Mark Bishop and the systemic greed he represented had so brutally stolen from him that sun-drenched summer afternoon. The scars, both visible and invisible, remained, but he did regain his voice, his spirit, his unique way of seeing the world. He continued to find beauty in the light filtering through leaves, though now it was a more fragile, precious beauty. He became in his own quiet, determined way a youth ambassador for neurodiversity. His artwork, vivid and poignant, depicted his experiences, the terrifying storm of the meltdown, the crushing weight of the assault, but also the steadfast lighthouse of his parents' love, the slow dawn of healing, and the resilient, vibrant colors of his inner world. His pieces were displayed in galleries at conferences and even in the halls of Congress during the debates over Eli's law. Dr. Lena Hayes often visited Eli and his family, watching with a profound quiet pride as he grew into a thoughtful, compassionate, and remarkably articulate young man, his AAC device once again an extension of his bright, inquisitive mind. Her office, the National Office of Neurodiversity Affairs, now significantly empowered by Eli's law, became a formidable force for lasting change, working tirelessly with communities, schools, law enforcement agencies, and HOAs nationwide to build a society that didn't just tolerate neurological differences, but truly understood, accepted, valued, and celebrated them. The memory of that horrific assault on the Willow Creek Gardens green would forever remain a stark, indelible reminder of the devastating consequences of ignorance, prejudice, systemic corruption, and the insidious abuse of power. But it also became a symbol of hope, a testament to the extraordinary courage of one small, remarkable boy, the fierce, unwavering love of his family, the awakening of a community, and the unyielding commitment of one dedicated public servant who had seized a moment of profound injustice and transformed it into a national movement for profound, lasting, positive change. The fight for true neurodiversity inclusion, Lena knew, was far from over. But because of Eli and because of the collective outrage and decisive action his story had ignited, countless other neurodivergent individuals across the nation would now have a significantly better chance to live their lives with the safety, dignity, respect, and full acceptance they so richly inherently deserved. The echoes of that popped balloon had improbably, irrevocably changed the landscape of a nation.